One of the most challenging things of coming to chapel on Thursday morning and studying Ruth chapter 3 is that in some way I've got to transport you back to 1200 BC from a modern day time and culture. Because if you've read Ruth 3 prior to coming to chapel this morning, you know that there's some things in there that certainly raise your eyebrows a bit, if not piquing your curiosity as to what in the world is going on in the text. And so what we want to do is get into that chapter by beginning back in chapter 1 just briefly and borrowing from that chapter. We want to look at Ruth's decision to stay with Naomi. You remember that as Ray presented those thoughts, and Orpah, her sister, decided to go home to Moab. Ruth clung to Naomi and said, I want to go with you. I will go wherever you go, and your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. And I listen to those words, and I hear, your God will be my God. Did we just witness the conversion of Ruth to a belief in Jehovah, the God of the Israelites? You see, she doesn't falter in caring for her aging mother-in-law. In fact, as we move into chapter 2, in verse 2, she demonstrates her willingness to go out into the fields and labor hard to provide food for these two women. She demonstrates a large, exceedingly large amount of integrity, character, desire to be a friend, to fill a need. But I want you to notice as we begin with the text that Brian read us this morning, notice the transformational effect of Ruth's care for Naomi. And notice how it begins to come to light. You remember as Ray related to us about how that Naomi says, don't call me by my name, call me by another name, which means bitterness. And Naomi, having lost her husband and then lost her sons, and now in a spirit of defeat heads home, hoping that in some way she can survive all that she's experienced. You know, I think about Ruth's decision to care for her aging mother-in-law. Now, I can speak to this from personal experience. My mom's 89, has macular degeneration, which means she has no forward sight. And we care for her every day. In fact, right now she has the flu and we're fighting it. And it's a hard journey. I often bemoan the fact that I got a lot of help from the church as I began to start my family and raise my children, but nobody prepared me for caring for my aging parents. I whine about it a bit because I'm like, where is that training? Where is that help? Because I'm not sure that I always know what's best. But I know that Ruth demonstrates a willingness to follow through on her purpose and her plan in caring for Naomi in her aging years. And I know the stress of caring for her can be quite demanding, and it would be very easy for a young woman to lose herself in self-pity over the condition of being stuck with a demanding responsibility of caring for her aged mother-in-law. How often it is that people in our culture forsake those who are older and who have no one to care for them. There's a good insight into some ministry opportunities right there. But you see, Naomi had experienced a difficult life. She had transitioned from poor choices in going to Moab in the first place to sad experiences of losing her husband and sons to deep disappointments in how life was turning out. But Ruth is her one bright spot in her life. And now, in chapter 3, we have a new opportunity dawning. By God's gracious hand, there had an encounter. As the Hebrew says, it happened. It happened. It just happened that Ruth had met Boaz in the field. Now, if you don't know the Scripture, that might seem like a fairy tale. But we know the God that's at work here. And we know there's a design in His purpose. And so the verses 1 through 5 here that were read actually began back in chapter 2, verse 19, when Ruth told Naomi about going to gather the sheaves and harvest the grain. And she revealed that she had met a man by the name of Boaz. Now, if I can put it this way, and I think we can all understand it, this was the beginning of the mother-in-law strategy. Okay? Now, I've tried to picture, I play this out in my mind because I am the victim of a mother-in-law strategy, so I understand this pretty well. I think about what's going on here and how that a woman who had said, "Call me bitterness," has now transitioned through the care of Ruth to a point where she begins to find purpose in life. And just like any good Jewish mother, all right, she has found, well, let me borrow from Fiddler on the Roof. Matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match. Okay, we know the song. And so you can see Naomi's eyes light up as she sees an opportunity. All right. Now, she begins to give this advice. I read this text and I'm thinking, oh, is not Boaz, with whose servants you have been, a kinsman of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing, barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes. And you hear the advice that's given by Naomi here. And I think about parental advice and know that gentle persuasions and serious advice may frequently be put to good use. You notice that Naomi is not becoming bossy or somehow imposing in a compulsive way an objective upon Ruth. She's just simply giving her suggestions and direction to this young woman. And just because this strategy is described in the text here, in the Bible, doesn't mean that it is a prescribed part of Scripture. All right? And you may wonder what I mean by that. And that is sometimes, and especially since I have all the years of working with young people, we'll study the book of Ruth, and they'll look at this and go, "Oh, hey, I found a strategy here." I'll just bring it up to modern day. It'd be like if my daughter was at Harding, okay, and I called her up and said, "Hey, I was reading Ruth, and I found a strategy for you. Why don't you go over to the boys' dorm and uncover some feet? And you might find a husband." You see how absurd that would be? And so we're not trying to find a model for finding a husband here. We're simply looking at a strategy that a mother-in-law puts in place for Ruth to go and find a husband. She has grown in her observation from bitterness to, "I need to find someone with whom you can create a life. I want to give back to you as you have given to me." What a beautiful spirit of friendship. Now imagine yourself, though, sitting in the room next to Naomi and Ruth and overhearing the conversation that's going on in verses 1 through 5. All right? And I'll try to pull out my best Jewish mother interpretation here. But you can hear her say, Boaz. Boaz, he's a good man. Have I not told you that Boaz, he's a good man? He's winnowing grain at the threshing floor tonight. Are you there with me? Okay. She says, take a bath. Wash yourself. And get the good stuff. Get that good perfume. Put that on. Put on your best clothes. Go down to the threshing. And this is what I want you to do. Don't interrupt his meal. Wait till he finishes eating and he settles down for the night. And make note of the place where he lies down. And when it is dark, go, lift the covers off of his feet and lie down at his feet and wait. And he will tell you what to do. As you can see, that strategy is not going to work real well in the 21st century. In fact, we're going to have a very hard time understanding what that's talking about unless we get back into the original language and look at some of these words that have such rich meaning. I love verse 6. Read with me. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. Wow. Now, I'm thinking about her as she prepares. What's going through her mind? You realize Ruth's been married once. She understands the joy of marriage and the relationships that's there. Now, there's got to be some excitement in her as she begins to bathe and to put on the perfume, put on her best clothes, and she begins to walk through the community and out to the threshing floor. And you can see her as she goes. Perhaps she's even humming, maybe singing a little bit to herself. Going to the threshing floor and I'm going. I mean, I don't know. There's something about her in her step and about her spirit that indicates that she's willing to obey and she's anticipating something she has no idea will happen. You know, isn't Ruth's faith amazing? Wash your face. Put on some perfume. Dress in your best clothes. And she's on her way. You know, she's not arguing, debating. If it had been me, I'm sure I would have said, wait a minute, I'm not sure about this strategy because, you know, that threshing floor is a place where all the men are now working and gathered. And it's a place that's pretty hostile to women. And you're asking me to go down there at night and to lift the covers off of a man's feet that I barely know and wait for what will happen? Seems a little suspect to me. But she believes and she acts. And so she gets to the floor, and the scripture says, verse 7, when Boaz had finished eating and drinking, he was in good spirits. He went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth, after time for him to settle, relax, perhaps doze off, approaches quietly, uncovers his feet, and lays down at his feet. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. Yeah, I'd say so. Scripture says, and he turned and he discovered, excuse me, a woman lying at his feet. Who are you? He asked. I am your servant Ruth, she said. And then she goes off script. You notice that everything that Naomi had told her to do, she has done exactly as told to do it up to this point. However, Naomi has said, then he will tell you what to do, but Ruth flips the script. And she begins to make a request of him. I am Ruth, your servant. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer. Pardon me. Okay. You see, Boaz had worked hard all day. He was well fed, satisfied. He found a comfortable place where he could lie down and in order to guard the crop that he had worked so diligently to harvest and to prepare. Ruth slips in, and as Scripture says, around midnight, somewhere in the dark hour of the evening, she quietly and noiselessly slips in, uncovers his feet, and lies down to wait for whatever would happen next. The Hebrew says, that literally Boaz bent at the middle. That's the word. And he sat up. He says he turned over, but he sat up and he looked and he saw the figure of a woman at his feet. And he was startled. And he asked, "Who are you?" You know, I think about this is more than a request, a demand. Who are you? Well, that's Ruth. Can you see who she is? You've seen her in the field. You've had conversation. You've taken notice of her. Don't you recognize her? Well, remember it's dark here. All right? And she's put on her best clothes. And you think back to that as she prepared, almost as though she were preparing for her wedding day. She has put it on. She's wrapped up. The Eastern dress now conceals her identity. And she perhaps pulls back her head covering and says, "Well, I'm your servant, Ruth." And with a bold, very direct statement, she says, "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." Well, that's where we lose it. Because in our culture, it appears as though there's something sensual or sexual that's about to take place here. And that she's saying, you know, take me in and let's have relations. But that's not at all. That would be totally against the integrity and character of these two characters in the story. And so let's continue here. Those best clothes, the bathing, the perfume, everything was to present herself in a way that would allow him to know how much she cared for him. She requests Boaz to spread his garment over her. And as indicated from the text, this is a sign of protection. It is a sign, an appeal for protection from the one to whom she's placing herself in submission to. But yet at the same time, the law allows for a woman to ask a man for marriage. And in this phrase is the literal request, "And marry me." Place your cover over me, protect me, and marry me. Well, that seems pretty bold to most of us, because usually the guy's the one that gets on the knee and opens the ring box and, you know, makes the request. But she's making this known to him. This is not an invitation to sexual advances. As I've mentioned, it would be totally out of the character of the individuals in the story. I wish I had time, and I invite you to think about the concepts that are engaged here as she brings up this term kinsman redeemer, the Goel. Leviticus 25, just put that in your notes, verses 23 through 28, has the commentary on this particular situation, as well as Deuteronomy 25, where it discusses the rules of the levirate marriage. Both are involved here. But what I noticed and I wrote down, and I want you to hear, is that all the words for redemption in the Old Testament find their source in the common things of daily life. But they all take on great significance as the common meanings are applied to explain to us the actions of God on Israel's behalf. As that concept of redemption moves into the New Testament, it is not rooted in Greek culture or the Roman law, but in Old Testament revelation. Redemption is a family matter. It is an expression of the deepest possible relationship. Notice that it's never a stranger who has the right to come to the aid of a person who is owned by another or burdened with an unpayable debt. Only the near kinsman with the resources is able to act. Verse 10, "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you've shown earlier. You've not run after younger men, whether rich or poor. See, Boaz, who is more advanced in years than Ruth, and he realizes he may not have a shot. He's somehow, too old for her. Recognizes all the kindnesses, the former kindnesses that Ruth had expressed to Naomi in her care, and now understands that she's making an appeal to him. And says, you were free to chase and follow after your heart and to acquire a husband from other age mates, whether rich or poor, but you have humbly chosen me. And I'm honored. And he says, now, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Everybody in town knows about Ruth and what she's doing. And it's not going to be called into question. And so as they have their conversation here, it's revealed that Boaz has a heart for Ruth, and he wants everything to work out right. But he also knows there's a wrinkle in the plan, that there's someone who's ahead of him in line, according to the kinsman redeemer, the Levirate law of marriage. And he must follow the rules to exactness in order for this relationship to continue. And he says, although it is true that I am near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. Can you hear that voice of disappointment? Perhaps a little resignation and a concern that this might not work out for him, although it will work out for Ruth. He says, stay here for the night. You go to milling around out here in the dark, you may, upset, and who knows what chaos could result if they find a woman on the threshing floor at this time of night. So lay down and rest. And he lay down to rest as well and began to think this through. And he says, and so in the morning, I'll talk to the other redeemer. If he wants to redeem, good, let him redeem. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until the morning. So she lay at his feet and got up before anybody could recognize her. And she said, and he said to her, don't let it be known. I think he's talking more to himself here as much as to Ruth, but don't say anything about being here tonight. That's going to be a discretionary gesture on my part. And I want to be able to deal with this at morning light. And he said, wait, before you go, give me your cloak. And he took it and he filled it with 6 measures of barley, which is about 50 pounds of grain. Now, I don't know how she distributed that, because I've carried chicken feed and it just pretty much wears me out, going about 20 yards to try to put it in the can to feed the chickens. But somehow he distributed that in her cloak and placed it upon her, and she went toward town or back toward town, and he went on to the gate to handle this matter. I can't close this lesson without getting to this point, because I think it's pretty important, especially for those who are young and unmarried as of yet. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, how did it go? Okay. My daughter, hear these words. Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her. Then she told her everything that Boaz had done for her. If you cannot go straight home and tell your mother everything that happened in your relationships, then it probably shouldn't happen. We're talking about a woman who had a heart of purity. She disclosed everything that was going on in the relationship. And she was marveling at what God had done during the night. And then she added, and he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. You see, that's an investment in the relationship. So we have here Ruth with Naomi over here. We have Boaz over here at the gate at daylight waiting to resolve the situation. And we're right here waiting till tomorrow when author is going to take us into chapter 4. And I don't want to steal much of his thunder because I know he will be talking about the kinsman redeemer. But I do want to end with the postscript. Boaz is a foreshadowing of our kinsman redeemer, Jesus Christ, who, according to Hebrews, became one with us in everything except our sin, in order that he might redeem us. As Boaz deals with Ruth, so Christ deals with every one of his repentant, believing people. As Ruth cast herself at the feet of Boaz, so we cast ourselves at the feet of Christ. She's dependent upon Boaz's mercy. We are dependent upon Christ's mercy. She is being covered over by the corner of his garment. We are being covered over by the blood of the covenant. She is being introduced to all the peace and security as a result of being under the wings of this wonderful man. We are in the shadow of Christ, and we find that he soothes our sorrows and calms our fears and dries every tear. She, going up the road, burdened by his benefits, and we're going up the road being made aware of the wonderful provisions that God has made for us. She came to Boaz, a penniless alien. We come to Christ as penniless aliens too. You see, this is a real story. It's not a fictional drama that's played out on a Hollywood stage in order to be told like a fabrication. This is an ultimate story about Jesus, and ask us a gospel question as it closes. Have you ever cast yourself down at the feet of Jesus and asked him to make you his own?